G'day, ZiggyD here. In this video I want to share with you guys my experiences in learning to build my first standard deck in Magic the Gathering. I'll also share some standard deck building basics and tips and give you guys a look at the Vampire's Madness deck that I ended up building so you can potentially build it for yourselves. This video is part of my sponsorship with Hasbro and as such is a paid promotion. However, this is all me. My opinions are my own and Hasbro had no say in the making of this video. You can learn more about my personal code of ethics and how I handle sponsored content in the description below. The story of my journey into Vampiric Madness began with the Eldritch Moon pre-release. These are events where you get a chance to play with the new set prior to release by making a sealed deck with 6 booster packs. At the pre-release, I put together a blue and red deck that contained several creatures and other spells that use the Madness mechanic. It went pretty well, and over the course of that event, I fell in love with the Madness mechanic. Madness is an alternative way of casting spells. When you go to discard a card with Madness, you can instead cast that spell for its Madness cost. Sometimes this is actually cheaper than the regular cost of the card as well. At a cursory glance, this is the main benefit of Madness: cheaper cards. You can play bigger creatures on earlier turns, or you can play more spells per turn. That alone is a nice benefit, but it's not why I fell in love with the mechanic. Madness also has a few other key benefits. Firstly, usually you are discarding a card for some other bonus. Sure, sometimes your opponent forces you to discard a card and you can instead play it with Madness, but often you're giving a creature a buff, such as transforming an Heir of Falconwrath. And sometimes you're discarding a card as the casting cost of a powerful spell such as Lightning Axe, a 1 red mana removal spell that deals 5 damage. The combo of getting a powerful effect or spell, along with turning a drawback into a cheaper spell, it feels like cheating. And then there is also my favourite part. Madness allows you to play any card whenever you trigger a discard. This means you can play creatures during combat, enchantments at instant speed, and even creatures on your opponent's turn. This leads to some really clever plays, such as discarding a card to transform Heir of Falconwrath as your opponent attacks and summoning a Madness creature to instantly and unexpectedly block the attacking creatures. So after I fell in love with this mechanic, I decided to build my first custom standard deck around it. And that is certainly one way of building your own deck. Finding a mechanic, card, or combo that you really like and think has strong potential, and then looking for how you can further exploit it in a constructed deck. So once I'd found the mechanic I wanted to try and exploit, I set out looking for the best way to do so. There are a bunch of different Madness cards, and cards that allow you to discard those Madness cards in red, black, and blue. However, I found the strongest concentration of these in red and black, particularly in the Vampire tribe. So I pulled out some nice strong cards with these mechanics and looked at how they might play together. I saw creatures like Furyblade Vampires, which enable Madness through discards, and Incorrigible Youths who get really cheap with Madness. I also saw powerful removal spells like Lightning Axe as Madness enablers and Avacyn's Judgment as Madness outlets. And then I saw the Falconwrath Gorger that gives all your vampires Madness. Putting these pieces together, I felt that the real strength of Madness is not in its efficiency, but in how fast and aggressive it lets you play. You can slam down removal spells like Lightning Axe to simultaneously drop your hasted Incorrigible Youths to attack that turn. You can potentially dump so many spells on the board so quickly that you can overwhelm your opponent while they're still struggling to get their defensive pieces together. I put together some initial iterations of this deck idea together on paper and on Magic Duels and just smashed out a bunch of games. Over time I pulled out cards that felt too slow or didn't really contribute much to the core strengths of the deck. During this process, however, I made a mistake, one that I think many new players make. While tweaking my deck, I noted areas of my deck that didn't do so well, such as defense and mid to late game power, and I tried to plug those gaps. However, at the Grand Prix in Sydney, I spoke to Jason Chung, a professional aggro player who helped me realise the error in this line of thinking.
With aggressive decks, the first few turns are the most important, and if you're slowing down by a whole turn because of your land, it can be like game breaking. For this deck, like you want to play more mountains, and therefore you can play less swamps, whereas your black cards, like you might not need them until like a bit later, so you can just like have your mana base much smoother. You know that like turn 1 you'll always have a mountain, and then later on you'll draw your black eventually, and for that reason you might have to like stay away from cards like Drana.
By trying to plug these gaps as they came up, my deck slowly inched away from its original goal, to be fast and aggressive, to kill my opponent before they had a chance to stabilize. I ended up playing a lot of slower creatures, and I screwed around with my land base in order to do so in a way that would potentially be fumbling with mana problems in the crucial early turns. By trying to strengthen my mid and late game, I'd weaken my early game aggression, when in reality I should be aiming to win before we even get to the late game. So I cut out slow defensive cards like Twins of Mora Estate, moved closer to a red deck with just a splash of black, and used faster hybrid lands that would grant me a little bit of black mana on the same turn that I played them. In order to keep things as fast as possible, I also removed cards that had a casting cost of 2 black mana, as these would require a lot more black land that could interfere with playing some of my most aggressive red cards. I continued to work on my deck and sought advice from other players as the date for MTG's Eldritch Moon game day approached. I decided that this event would be the perfect final test for my deck and my newly forming skills as a deck creator. Game Day is an event held shortly after each expansion release at local game stores that is a perfect time for new players to come out and play in a casual friendly format with their standard decks. You get full art promo cards for participating, you can win full art foils potentially, and a champion playmat if you win the tournament. Most stores also give booster packs as additional prizes as well. I was on my New Zealand holiday when Game Day came around and I went and played at Cerberus Games in Wellington. The event was super fun and the community there was very welcoming. I played some intense and very fun matches with my Madness Vampire deck, and I even got some surprised moments from my opponents with the Madness combos I played. Very satisfying. One highlight in particular was a game I played where my opponent used a removal spell on my only remaining creature and was on the road to stabilizing and taking the game from me. I had a light bulb moment, and in response I played a lightning axe to kill my own creature. Why? So I could discard Avacyn's Judgment, pay its madness cost, and deal the final lethal points of damage I needed to my opponent to win the game. Plays like that are why I made this deck. So how did I do with my final deck at game day? Was my first deck an epic failure or a resounding success? Well, I won't be taking home any Pro Tours just yet, but I did win 3 rounds and lost 2 out of the 5 that I played. And some of those wins were against decks modelled after Pro Tour decks as well. I fell just outside of the top 8, so that was the end of the night for me, but I'm very happy with how my first deck and game day went. Especially since this ultimately turned out to be a pretty budget deck, with very few rare and valuable cards in it, and I'm especially pleased with how fun it turned out to play as well. Before we move on to a deck tech of my Vampires deck, I wanted to share some of the deck building tips I've learned with you guys. The number one most overlooked and yet most important part of your deck is your land or mana base. Your mana sources need to be properly distributed so your key cards can be played on their turns. Have a 4 mana cost black card that is essential to your strategy? Well, then you need to make sure that it's as likely as possible that you'll be able to play it on turn 4. This can also mean cutting cards that skew your mana requirements away from your core strategy cards, like I had to do by cutting my 2 black mana symbol cards from my deck so that I could more reliably play my essential red vampires on the first 2 turns. There are a few tools online for helping calculate your mana requirements, but I highly recommend reading an article by Reed Duke on the basics of mana. I'll link it in the description below for you guys. The next tip I've learned is that there is a very good reason why you only ever see 60 card decks in Standard. Although it's legal to go above 60 cards, the closer you are to that minimum legal amount, the more likely you are to draw your key cards. This is also the same reason why most constructed decks will run 3 or 4 copies of their most important cards, 4 being the maximum allowed. Next, pay attention to your mana curve. Count up the cards you have at each mana cost and you'll get an idea of where the strengths of your deck lie. My deck is weighted strongly around 2 and 3 mana, with Madness bringing that down a little bit. As such, I know I'm weak moving further and further past turn 4, as my opponent can potentially play cards that will steamroll my weaker creatures. So I know that my goal is to kill my opponent before that point if possible. If on the other hand your mana curve is higher, then you need to make sure that you have some ways of surviving until your strong cards have come into play. For example, a popular card in higher mana curve decks has been Gnarlwood Dryad, a death touch creature that can easily protect against attacking creatures. A really high mana curve might also want some ways to ramp up their mana to get there quicker, such as creatures or artifacts that produce mana or bring extra land into play. And finally, recognize that deck building in MTG is an iterative process. You'll need to playtest and adjust your deck over time, get better cards, fine-tune your mana base, and keep looking for weaknesses and strengths and how to improve on them. Don't expect to instantly field a game-winning deck, even for casual play. This process can be really fun though. Working on and improving your deck over time and having rematches against friends after making changes is immensely satisfying, so let yourself enjoy the entire process. So now, to finish out this video, let's do a quick deck tech for my Madness Vampires deck. You'll be able to see how my final deck turned out, so you can potentially build it and play your own version, and maybe even improve upon it. Be sure to let me know if you do. If you just want my deck list, you can check out the tapped out link in the description below. 4 Falconwrath Gorges are included as a 1 mana cost 2/1, a perfect turn 1 drop that also helps the deck a lot by giving all vampires madness. 4 Fury Blade Vampires are the real workhorse of this deck. Each time you move into combat, you can use it to discard a card for Madness and to pump it to a 4/2 with Trample. A perfect coupling with these Fury Blades is the 4 Incorrigible Youths we run. Discard 1 with the Fury Blade in combat and then swing in with this hasted 4/3. All of a sudden you've gone from having a 1/2 on the board to attacking with 8 damage in the blink of an eye. In a Madness deck like this, your hand will empty quickly, and then we bring out the Bloodhall Priest. 2 damage to creatures or players on entering the battlefield or attacking. It quickly cleans house. Other cards like Stromkirk Occultist and Sin Prodder assist with card draw, Air of Falconwrath gives us another Madness activator, and Blood Mad Vampires force our opponent into throwing their creatures into less than favourable blocks lest they grow out of control. A super important card in this deck is Stensia Masquerade. This enchantment gives our attacking creatures the very powerful First Strike and gives them counters when they damage the player. This is a lethal combo as First Strike makes our high damage creatures roll over blockers, and at the same time as making our opponents want to block lest our creatures grow out of control. We run 2 copies of Stensia Masquerade to help ensure that we'll see it most games. On the spells front, Fiery Temper and Lightning Axe allow us to clear a path for our attacking creatures at the same time as interacting with Madness. Nahiri's Wrath allows us to dump our hand to clear the board, and Avacyn's Judgment gives us a way to deliver a finishing blow to our opponent if we get into a board stalemate. Land base is 12 mountains, 2 swamps, and then 8 fast red-blacks with Foreboding Ruins and Smouldering Marsh. These hybrid lands are one of the most costly parts of the deck, but you can substitute them with mountains and a couple more swamps. If you like the deck, you want to upgrade into these hybrid lands though, because they're the best way for us to splash black. However, if you want to make this deck even more budget, you can actually cut all of the black and replace with a few more red creatures. 22 lands is pretty low, I know, but this is a fast, low mana cost deck, especially when you factor in the Madness costs of cards. Play this deck fast and aggressively, don't be afraid to trade creatures to clear a path, and keep an eye out for Madness combos you can surprise your opponents with. Have fun guys, and be sure to share any tips or questions you have about standard deck building in the comments below. That's it for now, I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.